the conference with another talk continuing on this time on API products from Daugherty, product marketing manager at Stoplight, great company for managing, designing APIs, all right, about making customer-centric API products. Hello, Anna, how are you?
Hello, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Doing really great. Yes, the stage is yours for 25 minutes. Thank you for being with us.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you for having me. First of all, I want to say that everything Raphael was speaking on just now in the previous session really speaks our language. So we're going to take what he proposed and take it a step further with the idea of customer centricity. So you'll learn a little bit about API products in this, but we're going to really wrap your brain around what does it mean to be customer centric when you're working with API products. So next slide is, there we go. What is customer centricity, right? That might be your first question, is like, what does that even mean? If you're a technologist, if you're an API technologist, the chances are that you have been working on the language of the API, you've been working on building it, creating it, but maybe you haven't really been working from the customer's perspective, and maybe you've never been expected to do that before. So we wanted to bring this idea to you to kind of educate you on what does it mean to be customer centric, especially now that APIs as products are so prevalent. Here is our definition. Customer centricity is the ability of people in an organization to understand customer situations, perceptions, and expectations. You may have heard the term empathy being used a lot when we talk about product management, product development. That's what we mean when we say you need to have empathy. You need to have empathy for your customers' expectations. Because if you don't, you're missing out on a lot of opportunities that we'll get into in a few minutes. But truly, if you are building API technology, you want to get away from thinking of it as only a piece of technology. You want to get into the mindset of, this is something my customer will use. This is something that we can drive business outcomes because it's so delightful to use. So let's take a little bit of a step back and say, what does a customer mean in this context? Because, you might traditionally think of a customer as a person buying a pair of pants. But your customer is the person who's using your external API. They're, just like Raphael said in the previous session, your developers. Sometimes they're even, the business end of another business integrating with your API. So customer is an end user, but specifically for monetized APIs in this context. Some of the concepts that we're going to cover in this presentation are absolutely useful for internal APIs too. Don't let that escape you. A lot of this can be used and improved upon for internal API end users as well. But because this is a monetization track, we really want to talk about it from the perspective of a monetized or external API. Now let's get into the meat of why you would even think about APIs from a customer-centric viewpoint. Why do you care, right? The most important reason is because you want people to actually use, continue to use, and pay you for that API that you've produced, right? So if you create an API and put it out into the world, the old adage of if you build it, they will come is no longer relevant. You need to create an API that people want to use. You need to create an API that is delightful, that people want to adopt, that they want to keep using, and that they will pay you for. What has traditionally prevented that level of customer centricity in API development? We at Stoplight have been sort of on the forefront of API design as a concept, and Raphael alluded to this as well. API design is a crucial part of taking your organization API first, putting the API at the forefront of how your business does business. We think it's very, very crucial that we transition away from a previous way of doing business, just taking APIs and chucking them at whatever problem you have. Oh, we have a backend that needs to be exposed. Let's just put an API on it with no consideration for who that end user will be. You would just go code first, make it, there you go. We think there's a better way. And that better way is more of a figure eight than a shuttle launch pad. It's a life cycle, right? And it's continuous. And the thing that makes it customer centric is the definition. What does a customer need? The design, what will be the best design for the customer to use? Building it and testing it to know that it is what they want, right? Mocking it to make sure that they can give you feedback. And throughout the entirety of the life cycle, getting and applying the feedback from your customers. That's why it looks like a figure eight, because it's continuous. It doesn't end when you launch your API. You continue to improve the performance and the expectations of your customer by providing feedback and iterating on your external API. Let's take a little bit of a step into why customer centricity fits into this talk track. We know that an API as a product is a concept that's becoming increasingly understood. You know what a software as a service is. Like that, API as a product is the way you expose and monetize your organization's unique functionality and services. It's at the core of your business value, right? It's not just the method of delivery. It's not just that technology. It's what is being delivered. It's the value of your business, the value of your data, the value of your core capabilities, and also delivered to your customers. That's why we think APIs, just like a product, any product, should be actively maintained. They should be supported. They should be easy to use. Like I've been saying in this presentation, delightful for your customer. And they should have an owner who advocates for the customer and strives for continual improvement, not just delivery. You need someone who understands the customer and strives to advocate for them at every step of this process that we just showed. How do you do this? We have identified a much simpler way of looking at this into more of a classical product journey. Good old-fashioned product management. Discover what your API needs to do. Discover what your customers need. Discover if it already exists within your API program. Do you have an API that does a little bit of what they need? Can you reuse it? Can you spruce it up and make it external? Taking the time for discovery makes better outcomes, prevents the problem that we see a lot of two teams working on the same thing at the end of the day and then coming together and realizing, uh-oh, we've duplicated our efforts. Taking the time to discover means a better outcome at the end. Then going into product design, empathizing with how the user will want to use the API, making sure that it's spelled out before you even build it, right? Making sure that you have your specification, you get feedback on it, you perform a governance and overview view of how you can adhere to your design standards at your organization. All of that comes about in the design phase. And then when you're ready, you can spin up a mock server. And a mock allows you to get direct feedback from your customer. They can tinker around with it, right? And get their hands on it. It's one thing to have the design, right, and the open specification and the documentation for that and provide it to a customer. It's another thing to provide an actual working mock of your API that gives them a hands-on way that they can test out the functionality and see what needs to be improved before you build it. And then you can build it and measure it and continually improve it. So we think there's a lot of value to be had in the pre-production part of the discussion with your customers. Why? It's because you are free and flexible to do more of the things that matter to your customers. Release features more quickly, right? Your customers are waiting on the features that they want and need. If you are able to get their feedback quickly and put it into the API design process, you can release features that they want. Increase your API's value. Like we talked about at the beginning of the session, customer centricity makes products that people want to use, and so increase the value of your API. Reach new customers and audiences. One of the benefits of having a customer-centric approach is that people love to use your product and they'll talk about it, right? And so that word of mouth or the ability to share something that they like with someone else quickly proliferates and gives you reach you didn't expect before from just launching up an API. And then it also expands your revenue opportunities. When you treat your API as a product, you're thinking of new ways to capture value. And so the business is going to reap benefits from you thinking about your API as more than just that piece of technology. So now you're treating your API as a product. You are thinking about the product stages, every stage of life. And then you are thinking about how to manage and get feedback from your customers, how to design with customer centricity in mind. How do you do it, right? I've talked a lot about needing to do it, but now I want to give you some concrete ways to actually accomplish that. Here are 3 things you can focus on right now at your organization. And I want to step back and say, these are more than just the product manager or the product owner's responsibility. It's more than the developer's responsibility, right? If you're on an API development team, this goes bigger than you. It's a cultural change. I've been a co-host of the API Intersection podcast with Jason Harmon, and together we've learned over the past year that culture is an immensely important part of getting your API strategy going. And when it comes to making customer-centric APIs, it's purely a cultural shift. You need to empathize. You need to be able to anticipate what a customer needs. And those are all human interactions. It doesn't matter what kind of software, it doesn't matter what language, it doesn't matter what kind of API. It's all to do with how you interact and engage with your customer. Here are some ways you can advocate for the customer from your business. Consolidate inputs. So data, right? Data is going to help you. Qualitative and quantitative data are all incredibly important, but they're only as important as you're able to use an action on those pieces of data. So you want them to be consolidated. You want to be able to prioritize based on, how often people are asking for a feature, how big the contract might be if you might lose it because you didn't deliver on a feature that someone wanted. You can quantify how satisfied your customers are. And then you can see, what happens if we make this change? How dissatisfied will they be? You can make predictions. So making sure you consolidate all your inputs from reviews, interviews, sales calls, demos, every place you might get customer feedback, support, customer success. Consolidate them into one place. Product board's a really great place to do that. And then start actioning on those qualitative and quantitative pieces of data instead of in disparate places. Focus on the customer. Okay, this sounds silly, right? Yeah, we've been talking about this the whole time. This is more of a strategy than you might think. If you put into place each level of the business a focus on the customer, it starts to increase velocity throughout the organization. If someone's saying, I'm going to build this thing, but they stop and say, what does the customer want? You're preventing the just build it and they will come approach. And now you're putting the customer first. So if you put the customer first and you start advocating for the customer, the next person will put the customer first, and it continues on throughout the organization. That's how you build a culture change, is you help each other remember, but what will the customer want, right? Always ask that question. And then the third that the organization can do is to invest in skills that build that culture. So we talked about empathy. How do you teach empathy, right? That's an important skill to have to be customer centric, but it's not a skill you can necessarily teach. But what you can teach is, like I said, the focus on the customer. You can teach the ability to collaborate and to get feedback and to interview customers and to read the data that you consolidated and started actioning on. All of those are skills that you can build that aren't necessarily building empathy, but can rely on in order to be customer centric. Another really, really important piece that helps you achieve this focus on the customer is to develop a persona or multiple personas, depending on what your APIs are trying to accomplish. If you are not familiar, a persona is sort of a boiling down of the demographics and usage and type of person or user who might use your product. It's an abstraction of the fundamental things that bring together your end user, right? Who is that person? And what does their unique profile look like? And how can we use that abstraction to get into their shoes, right? Is to empathize with them, to understand them better, and to more clearly articulate our message and our product to a person like that persona. But you can't just come up with a persona out of thin air. It requires time. It requires a level of process and understanding how to create a persona from the data that you have consolidated, from the customer research that you should conduct, and it should convey all of the critical data points and behaviors, your users' preferences, the customer's purchasing decisions. How do they purchase software? How will they use your API? How would they like to be sold? And then it should also drive satisfaction or dissatisfaction, right? So your persona should understand what makes them happy, what makes them delighted, what makes them not delighted, right? You should understand what those things are in order to strive to achieve them in your product. Why do this? The reason you would create a persona is because it's so much easier and clearer to articulate a persona and help focus on the customer throughout the whole organization when you can describe them in an easy to understand and clear way. This is good old-fashioned product management. I know my API has to hit a certain persona. Now I know how to communicate what they need and want, and I can help the business understand it. So much better than saying, well, my end user is a group of developers. That helps almost no one. What's interesting is Gartner has conducted a study, and they report that only 36% of their respondents have had a customer persona development process in place for 3 years or more, which means it's an immature process within most organizations. I would say this is probably a generous, a generous number because a lot of organizations are startups, right? And so if you're an API driven startup and you haven't thought about a persona yet, now's a great time to do so. And it's not necessarily a developer's job to do this, but it is a developer's job to advocate for your customer. And so you would want to say, hey, product manager, product owner, solutions architect, someone who is on your team, have we thought about the personas of the end users, the customers who will be using our APIs? And if the answer is no, now is a great time to at least think about it. That's because the next thing you would want to do is to map out their journey. This is a common understanding in many products, right? Understanding how they use your product, how they get to your product firstly, how they sign up for your product, how they use it, what makes them stick around, what makes them want to talk about your product in public, right? How do they invite someone else to the product? A lot of these actions need to be mapped in order for the customer to be understood by the rest of the organization. You want to understand what they're doing, backed by data, to help improve the product at every single step. And this is a great way for you to put inputs for customer feedback, right? So if you have an end-to-end customer journey map, you could say, oh, we're seeing a lot of drop-off after somebody calls our API for the first time. Then they never call it again. What is preventing them from calling the API again? Let's get some direct from the customer feedback and figure out what are common reasons that they're not calling the API again. It's because you have understood that up until a certain point, the customer was performing the journey as you expected, but then they drop off. So this customer journey map is extremely important and really, really helpful for your organization. I want to leave you with this last piece. We talked about a little bit in the beginning of this presentation. Choosing to focus on the customer is a culture change, and it's tough. Culture change is one of the hardest things you can do. You could take a business proposal to anyone and say, I want to switch from SOAP to REST APIs, and here is my reasoning, and here's why we should do this, right? There's a lot of concrete evidence to support something like that. But the evidence to support a culture change is sometimes a little murkier. And so I want to leave with you that when you are externalizing APIs and monetizing them, that the point is to get people to use them, stick around, pay you for them, and then also be delighted enough to talk about them and support your API in the world. So that to me says that culture change to focus on a customer is a #1 priority. You want people to stick around. You want them to use your APIs. And so each person who is working with the API, developing it, designing it, it's your responsibility to think about the customer and to help each other think about the customer. So if you ever have a question about, am I doing this for me? Am I doing this for my back end? Am I doing this just because it's easier? Flip the script and ask, what does my customer want? So thank you for listening. And then hopefully I took away a couple of more concrete action items from a pretty squishy idea. But let me tell you a little bit about Stoplight. So I'm the product marketing manager at Stoplight. We are a remote first, but Austin, Texas-based startup. We are a platform for design, documentation, and governance of your APIs. So if you ever had a question of how many tools do I have to use in order to get my design, documentation, mocking, and governance all together, Stoplight's a great place for you to start. You can get started for free right now and try it out. We have some really awesome new governance features, including automated style guides. So if you are a person trying to enable consistency at your organization and you didn't know how to make your API guidelines useful, we have a new feature to help you do so. Go ahead and check it out. So here's a little slide to help you understand all the different features that you can utilize when you sign up for a free Stoplight account. And always happy to answer any questions about Stoplight. We're really passionate about APIs as a product, about design first strategy, and about helping your customers through your APIs that you develop.
Thank you very much. We have a 1 minute and a half for questions. But the first question, when do you consider the developer is the customer or the user for an end customer inside the company, like product manager or someone else?
Yeah, so it's almost one and the same. So a developer is a customer, right? So if they're inside the organization and they're an end user internally, they're still an end user and their feedback is still valuable. So before you launch that API into the internal world, even, you want to get their feedback at that design stage before you go production, right? Say, hey, you represent my internal customer. What do you think of this? Check out this mock, play with it a little bit, give me some of your feedback. It can be that simple. And so it's that stage right before you go to develop it and produce it. It's that design stage.
Yeah, because and in a previous talk in another conference, someone said, like, when you buy cereals, for the morning, yeah. When you buy cereals, actually the real consumer is probably the child, right? When you buy cereals for child, right? But the payer, the buying, the buying power is on the parents, right? So how do you help people to match the true personas between the developer who will be prescribing, consuming, using, versus the one who will put the credit card or or the statement of work, right? Yeah. How do you manage that?
So we have that very problem at Stoplight. Not problem. We have that very challenge at Stoplight, which is they're the developer and then the person who swipes the credit card. The way that you get a person to swipe the credit card is by being customer centric. Your customer is the developer. Just because they don't swipe your credit card doesn't mean that they're not your customer. They absolutely are. They need to advocate for you. So in order to get them to advocate for you, you need them to adopt, to retain, to be delighted, and to proliferate your API throughout the organization. And then they advocate to get that credit card swipe. They're still your customer.
Okay. Totally makes sense. Thank you very much, Anna, for being there with us. Love your energy. Love your pedagogy. It was really a great talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.